Hi friends, and welcome to the breakdown of my live performance and live jam hybrid setup. I've used this set actually last weekend to play a live set, and it went really well. So I thought to share a little bit of the thought process with you, what each device in the setup is doing and how I will in the future maybe optimize it for my live performances. The setup consists of 5 main elements, which is Ableton Live, the Ableton Push 2, then we have here the Digitakt, Digitone and the Moog Mother-32. I will also, by the way, on Patreon upload a full project file in Ableton, as well as the Digitakt file and the Digitone project file. So if you're interested in an even more in-depth look, you can check that out on Patreon. The set that I played included all in all 5 songs, and I will just now take you through the process on how I set it up, how I arranged it in Ableton and also with the different devices on what they are all doing. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Let's at first take a look here into Ableton Live. Ableton Live kind of like is in this setup the master device, which is sending a clock to the different machines and is also sending MIDI information to, for example, the Digitone and the Mother-32. It is also providing some own elements, like for example, all the kicks and basses are coming from Ableton Live. All the snares are coming from Ableton Live, the open and closed hi-hats, and some percussion sounds as well. Then we have some software synthesizers that are coming from Ableton Live, and some additional melodic samples that have been looped and further sequenced in Ableton. In general, the structure has, or basically the track structure for every song has 8 different groups. The first group that you can see here is the kick and bass group. So here I can start, for example, to play kick and bass, like you can hear right now. And here we have snare and hi-hats, pretty straightforward. Here we have additional percussions coming in on group number 4. Here we have the Moog Mother-32, where Ableton is sending MIDI to. Here we have the Digitone, where Ableton is also sending MIDI to. Then we have additional software synth, and finally some additional samples, which vary from track to track, you could say. And this is in general the setup in Ableton. We also have here, which you can see here, 6 different send elements, which are used in different ways. So this the last 3 send effects basically mirror kind of like the Digitone's reverb, delay, and chorus. So I went into Ableton and tried to emulate them as good as possible, and this is actually what I came up with. So this is the reverb, this is the delay, and this is the chorus. And by the way, all these effects and everything here is also available on Patreon, so if you're really into that, feel free to check that out there in further detail. And then ahead of that, we have 3 more send effects, which will be interesting to look at in combination with the Digitakt later. So these are send effects which I use as performance send effect. That means that I don't set their values fixed, but I use them to dial them in the set while I'm playing. The first one is a very long reverb. Now the second one is a delay, which has quite a high feedback. And the third one actually is a shimmer effect, which adds a very nice shimmery effect. I will show that to you when we are coming to the Digitakt, because the Digitakt is actually controlling all of these effects. Okay, let's move on to the Ableton Push 2. With the Push 2, I actually change scenes within Ableton and trigger the different scenes. You can basically see here in the layout that I have all the tracks available here that I mentioned, or the track groups, so to say, that I mentioned in the Ableton Live part of this video. So we have kick and bass, snare, hi-hats, percussion. Then we have the Mother-32, Digitone, additional synthesizers, and additional melodic samples. And this is also why I grouped them into groups, so that I have all in all 8 groups, so that they lay out like this in push, because then I don't have to navigate like this to the sides to have all tracks available. I can just see them here in one picture all together. And then basically, yeah, I can start the scenes, I can mute different tracks, bring them back in, change scenes, and more importantly, I can further scroll down, and then I have the different tracks coming up. Just stop that for now. You can see here that this one, what we are seeing here at the 8, basically the 64 grid here, what we're seeing here is a full track. So all of my tracks have a maximum of 7 scenes. And the main reason for that actually is that I want one scene which I can use for mutes. So basically, when I now have this one playing, I can use this one here, the row in the bottom, to perform the different mutes. And then also, of course, bring tracks back in. Still, I could still use that to mute all the tracks. And this is quite important because I work a lot with different mutes when using Ableton, and also basically in this setup. Also, it is important for me to know whenever there's an empty roll, this means that this track now reached the end and there's a next track coming up, basically. We talk about transitions a little later in the video, but in general, either the last scene of a track has a transition in it, or the first scene of a new track, which I can show you later. Transition actually means that I have elements already in here from the next track, but still some old elements from the track that was previously played, to have a smooth, how can you say, basically a smooth transition into the next part. Yeah, and this is basically how everything is laid up. This is basically the second track. This one here is then the third track. It has a little bit less scenes and is arranged a little bit differently. Then we have track number 4, and finally here track number 5. And then we reached the end of the setup. Yeah, and that's basically right now what I use the Ableton Push for, mainly just really to trigger scenes and to stop scenes, and to do basically the performance and combine different elements of the scenes with each other, which works pretty nicely. I'm looking also into ways of utilizing Push more, because of course it can do a lot more. Also here via the encoders, but haven't really found a way to weave that in. So yeah, but it still leaves me options for the future. Okay, then let's move on in the setup to the Electron Digitakt. The Digitakt actually has quite a special role in this setup, because it actually has 2 different purposes. First of all, in the Digitakt, I'm using the internal Digitakt's sequencer, which means all the tracks don't get MIDI information from Ableton, but they have the MIDI information directly in the device. This is important because this way I can use the fill tricks on the Digitakt, which means basically, let's just quickly start a scene. Maybe let's take this one here. Track number 8, let's start from the back, has a swoosh on it, which is only triggered when I press the fill trick. So for example, I could now here use the mute the kick, and now press this one, and you will hear a swoosh. This will only be triggered when I hold the page button, which means that I access fill mode, so to say. Tracks 5, 6 and 7 also just have fill tricks on them, which means these are kind of like my transition tracks, and usually they sound like this. So I can further use that to build up tension. So for example, yeah, let's move the kick again. Doesn't work perfectly on this pattern as it's quite a quiet one, but yeah, I think you in general get the idea. The other tracks actually have percussive elements on them which are always playing. So for example, track number 1, let me quickly mute the rest of Ableton here so that you just hear the Digitakt right now. It has this kind of like distant percussive sounds which you can hear a little bit in the background, which are great for building up some tension. Then track 2 always has kind of like an additional snare. And track 3 and 4 are closed and open hi-hat. Closed hi-hat, open hi-hat. And yeah, this then you can of course play on top of the elements that you already have in the scene. Like this. And here of course I can just use the mutes to bring them in, bring them out whenever I need them or whenever I have the feeling that I don't need them right now. So this is what the 8 sample tracks are doing. And the first MIDI track actually is a very important one for me because here I have set the 8 encoders up to control elements in Ableton to use this one kind of like as a MIDI controller. So what that does actually is you can see here the different values, and the first row of encoders controls percussion, the second row of encoders controls melodic sounds. So what I can do now, let me quickly get on a scene where I have a lot of stuff going on. Yeah, let's take just this one. So with this one, controls the volume of all percussive sounds apart from the kick and the bass. The kick and the bass I really like to just control via Ableton, but I wanted to have a way to kind of like fade in the percussive sounds. So when I dial this down and now bring it back in, you can hear the sounds coming back in. Same goes here for melodic tracks. Just the percussive sounds playing. And this one here affects the volume of all the melodic tracks, which is, by the way, for the groups, the Mother-32, the Digitone, the synths, and the samples. These two control the long send reverb that I mentioned in the beginning of the video. So here, I can send the reverb to the percussive sounds. Here, I can send it to the melodic sounds. And now, maybe you can already guess it, these two control the send delay. So with this one here, I can send it to the percussive sounds, which actually works really nice for build-ups. And with this one, can send it to the melodic sounds. Yeah, you can already hear it's a ton of fun to play around with that. And the last one controls the shimmer, which I mentioned. So this is it on the percussive stuff. Sounds super nice in more quiet patterns, gives it just a very nice noise floor in the background of the track, just a little bit of ambience. It's really lovely. And then for the melodic sounds, it sounds like that. So with the Digitakt, I can not only control additional loops, which are helpful to perform transitions between two different songs, but I can also control all the different send parameters, and this is one of the key performance elements I use in my live sets, because it's just a ton of fun to play around with the different send amounts, see how the sends sound on different song elements, then perform some mutes here on the push 2, and yeah, this way create a very hopefully versatile live set. Yeah, it's a ton of fun. Still learning a lot around that, but what I already enjoyed so far with it is, yeah, it's amazing. I just have a really good time using that. From the Digitakt, let's now move on to the Electron Digitone. The Digitone is used in a little bit of a different way than the Digitakt, because it's not sequenced via the internal sequencer of the Digitone. It's getting MIDI data from Ableton. And the main reason I did that is because then I can change the different melodic sounds coming from the Digitone when changing the patterns here. So for example, in the first pattern, we have these sounds. And then later on in the song, it changes to this. And the cool stuff around that is that I can still perform the Digitone's synth parameters. So for example, if we are in the first in the first scene here, I could still here open the filter, can immediately hear what an impact that has. Still then, with function and no, I can go back to the initial state of the synth settings, which is actually a very nice performance tool. You might have seen on the Digitakt and the Digitone that it's saying here in this pattern New Dawn, which is the name of the first song that I performed in the live set. I have here 4 different patterns on each machine. On the Digitone you can't see it because these patterns don't hold any MIDI data, which is why they are not flashing. But in general, yeah, 4 different patterns which reflect the different songs in the setup. One pattern, pattern number 2, is meant for 2 songs. It combines my songs I Am Satoshi Nakamoto and the song Haunting. So I just needed 1 pattern. So this is why I only have 4 patterns, but played 5 songs in the live set. And basically how I approach it is that whenever I change a song, come to the end of a song, I always perform a pattern change here to get to the next pattern of the next song, and then move on to the first scene of the next song. I will show you that in the transition part a little later. But in general, yeah, Digitone getting MIDI data from Ableton Live, having different sounds here on the different tracks, and these sounds I can still manipulate using the internal synth engine, which is a big performance element in my sets. And last but not least, in the setup of machines, we have the Moog Mother-32. The Moog Mother-32, I think, is one of my main performance elements in the setup, because this synth I really play with all of its different parameters. It's mainly getting MIDI information from Ableton, like you can hear right now. But then I can of course here change the synth engine. Yeah, in this way play around with it and have different combinations. And And of course, when I change here the scenes, the melodic material inside the scenes, which is the MIDI notes sent to the Mother-32, will of course also change. And that actually, yeah, I mean, you can already hear. You can play a lot around with that, and yeah, it just really adds to the performance elements. Sometimes during the performance, I like to switch the MIDI track off here and then use this internal keyboard of the Moog Mother-32, because I realized when I practiced for this live set, the Moog in combination with the reverb here, I just turned on, by the way, the sustain, so that I now have longer notes. And I now use the long reverb, and now also the shimmer. Yeah, it just sounds really, really nice, and yeah, it adds a little something to all the different sounds. So yeah, definitely a nice element to play live, which I really like to do in different breaks. You can check out my live set, I link it somewhere here, where you can see that, but there in the quieter sections of songs I really like then to use this. But in general, the Moog is getting MIDI information from Ableton. And there on top, of course, you can of course also use the shimmer and the reverb to just create very nice atmospheres. Yeah. This is basically how I use the Mother-32. It is an element of all the tracks that I perform, so all 5 songs have different parts in it, which are where the Mother-32 is playing, and yeah, I just love its sound. It sounds amazing, and it fits very well in my music, and yeah, I think it's a great performance synthesizer, which is why I use it that way. Okay, with all of that knowledge combined, let's quickly try to perform a transition from my first song, New Dawn, into the second song, I Am Satoshi Nakamoto. I'll just start the end of New Dawn, and then we will now start to move over. And I will just use different elements of everything that I've explained to do the transition. Bear with me that it's hard to talk while performing that, but I will try my very best to explain to you what I'm doing right now, or what has happened. So now I'm going into the last scene. So this is the last scene. You can hear in the samples there are already elements from the next song in. The Moog is still playing the arpeggio from New Dawn, and the percussive elements are also already the new ones. And now I can slowly start to bring in more elements from here. And also, of course, change patterns to the next pattern. So now we are in the next song, and now I can use the swoosh and go over. And now we are in the first scene of the second song of the set. And this is how I try to approach my transitions. Sometimes they have, of course, more energy. Sometimes they have a little less energy. This one here, for example, now had a little less energy. Sometimes I really also like to go all in, where I can then also use these fill elements here from the Digitakt. Also then in combination, of course, with a lot of delay. Yeah, and all of these elements together basically, at least I think, form a very good foundation for a live set. The more and more I practice with this setup, I feel more and more comfortable with it. And the good thing is I also discover more opportunities to use kind of like unused room. Like, for example, I mentioned, I think the Push 2 right now has way more opportunities of what it can do. Right now I'm just starting and stopping clips with it. But yeah, I'm pretty sure I will find more ways to use it. And this also happened to the other machines. So yeah, the goal is to actually keep it to that size, the setup, and use it like that. And yeah, with that, explore even more opportunities of make better use of the different machines within that setup. And yeah, I have a great time doing that. I also had a great time performing this live set at Outsiders Recordings. And yeah, looking now forward to maybe some live shows this year. Who knows? So if you want to book me, hit me up. I would be very happy to come over and play. Yeah. Setup is now ready, and I can't wait to explore it further. And yeah, that's actually it. That's how I approach this live set. I hope it gives you a very good first overview of what the different machines are doing. Maybe it also gives you some ideas for your own setup, how you can maybe make use of a hybrid setup using Ableton Live in combination with the different machines. By the way, one thing I didn't mention is actually, of course, I'm not only using Ableton Live and these machines. Of course, there's a laptop. I'm running a MacBook Pro and an audio interface, which is very important. I'm using the Arturia AudioFuse Studio, which is giving out MIDI to the Mother-32. And also it has a USB hub built in, which is very handy because therefore I can connect via USB hub the Push, the Digitakt and the Digitone, because both Digitakt and Digitone are running via Overbridge, so that I don't need any audio and MIDI cables. I can just use an USB cable. And yeah, this is how it's set up from an audio interface and laptop point of view. Didn't want to let this one out. And yeah, like I said, all the project files, Ableton project file, Digitakt, Digitone project files are available on Patreon. So if you want to check that out, links are in the description. And yeah, thank you all so much for watching. Really appreciate it. Thanks for all the support, also for the live set. Very happy to hear that so many people had such a great time tuning in. I had a great time playing it, so it's always nice to hear from the other side that also people resonated with it. So many thanks for you and for your support. And yeah, stay creative, and I see you in the next one. Cheers.